When the convict settlement part of the Moreton Bay colony was closed back in the mid-1800s, only one of the prisoners held there stayed on. Her name was Hannah Rigby. She was a former poor Liverpool seamstress turned prisoner and serial thief. Hannah Rigby notoriously served 3 separate sentences of transportation, including 2 at one of the harshest penal establishments in the colony at Moreton Bay. The book is called One Free Woman, the true story of convict Hannah Rigby, and the author joins me this morning to tell us a little bit more. Jane Smith, good morning. Good to chat with you once again.
Yeah, thanks for having me, David.
Now, One Free Woman, the true story of convict Hannah Rigby, your latest book, released at the beginning of this month. Who was Hannah Rigby?
Hannah Rigby was the only female convict to remain in Moreton Bay when they closed the penal establishment there. She was a fascinating character because she was one of only 3 women who were sent there twice. So Moreton Bay was a place where people went for secondary punishment. So if they'd already been transported from the UK or somewhere, then when they were released, if they reoffended, they would be sent to, or they could be sent to a secondary penal establishment. And
right.
So Hannah was sent to Moreton Bay twice for separate offences, and so she was, including the transportation sentence from England, she was sentenced to 3 separate sentences of transportation.
Wow, gee whiz. And so would she be, there would only be a handful, if any, besides her, I would imagine, who were sentenced to somewhere as with such a fearsome reputation as Moreton Bay twice. Was she the only one? Or?
Well, she was one of 3 sent to Moreton Bay.
Right.
There may have been others sent to other places twice, but I haven't looked into that.
Okay, gotcha. But let's just say that she had a bit of form.
She did. She had quite a lot of form. And I discovered that she had quite a few convictions in England before her transportation as well.
Gotcha. Just to clarify, so you mentioned she was the only person, convict woman, to remain in Moreton Bay when the penal establishment closed. Yeah. What do you mean? Do you mention that she chose to stay or something different?
Well, they started closing the establishment in 1839. It was a gradual winding down. And by mid-1839, most of the women had been sent back to Sydney or freed.
Right.
And there were a handful that remained until the end of that year, and then they all left except for Hannah. So she was still under sentence, so she didn't really have any say in whether she was remaining or not. But she was assigned to Dr. Ballow, David Keith Ballow. He was a colonial assistant surgeon at the time. And that seems to have worked out quite well for her because he was sympathetic to her. And only a short while after that, he wrote to the commandant of the establishment recommending that she gain her freedom.
Right.
And he said that she had never given him any cause for distrust or complaint. And that was successful. So she was freed shortly after that. Right. And that was actually what really intrigued me about her, because I found out about her when I was researching for a previous book, The Ship of Death, which featured Dr. Ballow heavily.
Yes, yep.
And I found mention that he'd advocated for her freedom. So, I thought, that's interesting. He must have been a compassionate man, and so I wanted to find out more. Yep. And it really intrigued me because he was a man of integrity and a well-respected man, but he was also a man of his time. He had convicts, and he wasn't afraid to punish them if he felt punishment was necessary.
Yep.
And here he is advocating for the freedom and highly praising a woman who was 3 times transported, multiple convictions, and who had 3 sons that were known of at the time by all different men, none of whom was her husband, and she did have a husband.
Right, okay.
It intrigued me that such a conventional upright citizen would speak so highly of a woman with this kind of record, transgressing against the law and society.
Absolutely.
So I thought, Oh, she must have had a bit of charisma.
Yeah, so a combination of he must have had some traits that were unusual for the time, but then she obviously had some redeeming features which didn't come out in her criminal record to make him feel that empathy, I suppose.
Yes.
Yeah.
So then she got her freedom in 1840, and she chose to stay in Brisbane town then.
Right, okay. Well, I'll explore that a little bit further in a moment, but just for the background, this book was made possible because you received a 2024 visiting fellowship with the Harry Gentle Resource Centre. That's part of Griffith University, which allowed you to research and write Hannah Rigby's story. But how did you, well, you've sort of touched on it there, but was this, did you apply for that specifically with researching her story in mind, or was it just one of many that you applied for, I guess, as a way of income or as a way to pursue interesting topics, and then you go and choose one?
Yeah, no, I applied specifically with that project in mind.
Okay.
So they open every year, they open up to applications for visiting fellowships, and the aim of the Resource Centre is to make stories accessible from Queensland's past, mostly from pre-separation, I think. But they're stories that we haven't heard much of, and so they're bringing stories of marginalised people or minority groups and people that you don't hear much of through history, making them accessible to the public.
Are you surprised, though, that this story hasn't been explored more? I mean, obviously, there's a lot of history to be written about, and I suppose even history buffs would be surprised at how much is in the records that deserves to be explored that hasn't been. But I would have thought, one of the few women to be convicted twice or sent to Moreton Bay twice, and some of those other juicy sort of morsels of her story would have attracted someone's interest in the past. Are you surprised that you're the first who's wanted to do this?
A little, but there has been some research. She had a Wikipedia entry and an Australian Dictionary of Biography entry, but they're quite very small and just the bare facts.
Yep.
As were known at the time. But it became clear to me that we know a lot about the stories of women who made good, like Mary Rigby, women who maybe married somebody important or wealthy and made success stories of their lives, or women who under their own steam became successful. Yep. But you don't hear that much about the women who didn't, the ones whose lives were unending drudgery, but they were the majority. And you don't hear much about them. So I really wanted to rectify that, and I thought that she was a good person to start with. But the other thing is that when they don't become successful like that, it makes it harder to research them because there's not that much available.
Well, that's right. Well,
so if you're researching a convict who was in Tasmania, then you're in luck because their records were great, and a lot of their records are still available.
Right.
But in New South Wales, which Queensland was part of back then, the records are much more patchy, so it was pretty hard to dig up stuff about her, but not impossible. I did find out quite a few things, and then you can sort of there was definitely enough for a book because her story needs to be put in context with the social structure of the time.
Sure.
It explains a lot about how she was treated and why she did the things that she did.
Absolutely. And that's actually I would imagine, haven't read the book, but the context is just as interesting as the story itself. But I have to just go back just a little bit. Why was Tasmania so good at retaining its records and even keeping more detailed records than New South Wales?
Yeah, I don't know that.
Don't know. Chalk one up for Tassie.
How it is, absolutely. Or Van Diemen's Land,
that's
as it
right.
was then.
Yeah. Okay. So where do you start? What sort of records are you accessing to research someone like this who doesn't have all that much written about them? Where do you start? I would imagine that's very much a skill in itself to know what might exist and actually find it.
Yeah, well, you scrape up everything that's already been written first and read that and see where they got their records from, and then go to those original records.
Yep.
And that raises a lot of questions that you can then, other people that she had contact with, and then I'll research them and find out more about them. And places like Ancestry.com and Find My Past are useful. So I found a fourth child that was unknown before.
Oh, right. Okay.
Well, it was actually her first child, who she had when she was in England before she came to Australia.
Right, yep.
And also a lot of the criminal records, like jail records and documents relating to trials, are digitised and available through sources like that.
Yep.
Some of those places only have the index records, so then if I could only get the index record, then I would contact, for example, the Liverpool Records Office in the UK.
Because she was from Liverpool.
And yes, that's where she was from.
Yep.
And then, buy the record, they'd go and get the complete one and scan it for me and send it. So, it's just one thing leads to another, and try and exhaust every avenue and talk to people who are experts too.
Toowoomba author Jane Smith, her latest book is called One Free Woman, the true story of convict Hannah Rigby. Really fascinating read. It's being launched officially down in Brisbane at the Avid Reader bookshop, but it is anticipated that she'll have a local launch as well, so we'll keep you posted on that.